It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, starring the inexhaustible John Hersey and the irrepressible Andrew Bernstein. I am Andrew Bernstein, and you are indubitably John Hersey. How you doing this morning,
You got
John?
it. I'm great. How are you doing this today?
Oh, I'm ready to rock and roll. I mean, we have one of my all-time favorite heroes to discuss today, and she is just an extraordinary individual in any way. And I think the I think we could say this right at the outset. I think will be the first woman to have an enormous impact on the development of world culture.
Absolutely. Of course, we're talking about philosopher and novelist Ayn Rand, famous for the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. What were her dates, Andy?
Yeah, Ayn Rand, Alyssa Rosenbaum, right?
hmm
1905 to 1982, born in Tsarist Russia. She's 12 when the Bolshevik Revolution breaks out. There she is, young Ayn Rand. What a pretty girl. What a pretty girl she was in her youth. Educated under the Soviets, University of Petrograd becomes University of St. Petersburg becomes University of Petrograd, and then eventually University of Leningrad. She studies studies history, right? I think at the University of Leningrad. Eventually defects to the United States. But I know you have a lot of information to share with us about Ayn Rand's biography, so I don't want to steal your thunder. But Alyssa Rosenbaum was her real name, right? Ayn Rand is a nom de plume.
Absolutely. Yeah. From a very early age, she was already a hero worshiper and very in love with fiction. I believe she was 8 when she wrote her first screenplay. And at 9, she came across her first true love, you might call it, Cyrus, a character who's a British adventurer in a book or a short story called The Mysterious Valley. And she loved his confidence, the way that he went up against great odds, struggled and achieved. So he was fighting for his freedom from an Indian Raja that captured him and his men. And she immediately fell in love with heroes, and shortly thereafter decided that she wanted to be a writer at age 9, which is just insane. Most people struggle half their lives figuring out what they want to do with their lives, and started writing pretty much immediately. While as you mentioned, the Soviets came to power in Russia, and her family fled to the Crimea, where the White Army was, at the time held sway. They held the ground there, and land there went back and forth between the White and the Red Army, and they were sort of there in the middle of the battleground. And she got to see what communism was really in practice firsthand: the bloodshed, the slogans that man should live for the state. And she understood that people like Cyrus, these heroes, couldn't possibly live in the type of world that the communists were fighting to erect. And she was indignant that this stuff was
Yeah.
even spouted in society, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
you're absolutely correct. I mean, her first novel, We the Living, is semi autobiographical, and I think the working title was Airtight, because she points out that the communists lock you up and seal you like in this vacuum where there's no air, you can't breathe. It's so your ability to live any kind of a life is so thoroughly constricted, and the title is important. But we the living, she's showing that the people who are most alive, the people who are most passionate about their values, our heroine Kira Ogwanova, who's semi-autobiographical, her love interest Leo Kovalensky, the idealistic communist Andrei Taganov. They have values personally. They love their careers. They love each other. They have personally, passionate cherished values, and they can't achieve them under the totalitarian regime. So I don't want to give away what happens, but it's a beautifully touching novel with a brilliant love triangle, and it really tells the truth about communism in a very, very powerful, very, very powerful film. You really see Ayn Rand's literary genius blossoming here. Even better is yet to come, but We Are Living, overshadowed by her later masterpieces, is a great novel in and of itself.
Yeah. And, shortly after this, not after We the Living, but after she decides to become a novelist or a writer for her career, when she was 13, she wrote in her diary, "Today, I decided that I'm an atheist." And she looked around, she said, "There's no reason to accept any idea that isn't backed by proof and evidence." And this idea that there's some sort of supernatural being over and above man degrades man. It says that there's this ideal that man cannot reach, cannot achieve. So she rejected this concept of God as evil, as really putting this gulf between man and the ideal. So she wanted to reach that
Right.
ideal, and she wanted to portray it, and she could do that, she realized, through fiction. She decided not to study literature. By this time, she had fallen in love with Victor Hugo. That was also around age 12. Started going through all of his novels, and absolutely fell in love with his just broad scope, magnificent view of man as a heroic being. And she understood enough to know that she wasn't going to learn anything about literature at Petrograd State University, I think it might have been called at the time. So she enrolls and studies history because she wants to know what is the backdrop of humanity, what has happened in the world, and how can I incorporate this into my novel so I can have a broad scope as well when I begin writing my masterpieces. So as you said, she enrolls in
Since
history.
right,
Mhm.
since they don't teach history anymore in the American schools, or very little. Don't even call it history, call it social studies. We discussed that in an essay in TOS a few years ago, didn't we, on heroes and villains in American education?
You did,
They don't
yeah,
even
great
call it
essay.
history. Yeah, no, thank you. Well, you did a good job editing it, buddy. But social studies. I mean, what is that? And so a lot of my students don't even realize history is, you break it up into two words: his story, right? It's the story of mankind. It's the story of humanity. It's his story. And so I'm looking for the facts, doing this inductively. Probably already has the idea of what she states later, that the goal of her fiction is to present the ideal man, and as the necessary foundation for that, the background, the backdrop, she wants to know what man has actually done in his life, what in his existence. What's he done? What's he not done? Who are the heroes? Who are the villains? Who are the great men? Who are the not so? Who are the not so great men? What's every man capable of? Every man, every woman, and history is the ideal field for that. So it's isn't it interesting, John? I think we're going to argue over the course of this hour that she revolutionized two fields, literature and philosophy, and neither one of those two was the one she studied in college. I mean, that's fascinating. I find that fascinating. How about you, buddy?
Well, yeah, but you're right. Her major did provide some of the inductive material that she needed to come to her broad generalizations, which she used fiction to demonstrate. So I think it was absolutely essential that she studied history, and I think she admitted this too. And so it might have even been before this, though, that she studied and learned about the history of the American Revolution and decided that America was her ideal nation. No, was that in high school?
Yeah, I think she was a teenager. She fell in love with the United States. She talks about sitting through movies, a whole movie, just to come back. It was, I think, when she was a teenager. Sitting through an entire movie just to get a 2 or 3 second scene of the skyline of New York City. At the start of the movie, she's got to sit through the whole thing to see the start again. She was in love with the American sense of life, and the American sense of life, of course, is captured brilliantly in the skyscraper skyline of Manhattan. Yes, Ayn Rand knew very early on, both at a sense of life level, and I think at the level of philosophy, that the individualism of that the United States was founded on was the uh, was the right political system that would enable her heroes to flourish. I mean, real life
Hmm.
heroes, who had values and wanted to pursue them, and they needed the principle of individual rights and limited constitutional government and political economic liberty. They needed that to flourish, to reach a flourishing life. And of course, later on in Atlas Shrugged, she develops an entire philosophic system validating the American principle of individual rights as that which is necessary for human life on Earth. But I think she knew it both as a sense of life issue and as theoretically, at least in politics, regarding the principle of individual rights when she was very young.
Hmm. Yeah, and this ties into the next part of her story and her development. So after Petrograd State University, she got her degree in history, went on to study some screenwriting at the State Technicum for the Arts in Leningrad. Um, and then in 1925, there was a window in which Lenin and the Bolsheviks were still letting some people leave the country. And she happened to get a visa to come to the US, I think to study abroad, to come visit family. Um, when she landed in New York, I mean, going back to her experience with these films and loving to see New York. Well, she came to New York and she cried at just the beauty of the city. Frank O'Connor later described these as tears of splendor, just loving these massive monuments to man's achievement. Spent a
Right.
brief stint in Chicago with some family. I believe an uncle owned a movie theater there, and she got in and watched lots of movies for free. And figured, I still need to learn the English language. I might have a shot at writing scenarios for silent film. Decided to go to Hollywood, and shortly thereafter, um, she went to the office of Cecil B. DeMille to try to get some kind of a job or connection. And he said, okay, yeah, the assistants there, okay, yeah, we'll call you. Walks out into the lot, and there in a big convertible is Cecil B. DeMille, and she's looking up with these big brown eyes. And he stops and asks, what are you staring at? And she explains, her admiration. They strike up a conversation. He's currently shooting The King of Kings, a film about Jesus Christ, and she
Yeah,
lands
DeMille was
a
great for
spot as an extra,
big,
right?
those big those big biblical epics, John. I remember he was still alive when I was a child. I remember seeing the Ten Commandments. I think it was a DeMille film.
Mhm.
Those widescreen Technicolor big Bible epics. DeMille was famous for. Well, I can't say those Bible film. Even as a child, I didn't really like religion. They were my cup of tea.
Ironic, huh?
But looking back on it now, yeah, looking back on it now, I could see his technical abilities, what great director he was, and why Ayn Rand loved it. But let me tell a story here. Can I interrupt you for a second just to
Please.
tell a story?
Yeah.
Yeah, because this happened to me a few years ago in Poland. Because the story's about Ayn Rand, obviously, but this was like 3 or 4 years ago, and I was lecturing in Poland, and Poland's still a very Catholic country. It's very religious. The intellectuals, you know, uh, are very religious. So I was giving some lectures, and I met this guy. This guy was very smart. He's a PhD in history. He was an expert on the Soviet Union. He'd done all his research on the Soviets, written all these books. And so after the lecture, we're at dinner with a bunch of some of the objectivists there with the Polish intellectuals, and this guy insists. He keeps badgering me. How did Ayn Rand get out of Russia in 1926? It was impossible to get out of Russia in 1926. Nobody got out of Russia in 1926. Stalin had brought the Iron Curtain down, to quote Churchill's much later phrase. It was impossible to get out. I said, I don't know how she got out. I know that she did. Here's this guy. He's a history professor, author of several books, expert on the Soviets, and he says to me, "I'll tell you how she got out. She made a deal with the Soviet regime that she would come to the United States, and she would promote atheism in the United States, and she would undermine Christianity, as the religion in America." So I'm looking at my jaw drops. I said she cut a deal with the Soviet regime. That's how she got out to destroy religion in America. He says yes. So I said, Ayn Rand was a Soviet agent. Who knew? I heard a lot. I heard a lot of things about Ayn Rand in my life, but that was a new. Even to me, that was a new one. Ayn Rand was a Soviet agent, so now we could out her. you know, so yeah. So anyway, I said to him, I mean, I was flabbergasted, but I said to him, if that was her goal, if that was the deal, she didn't keep up her end of the deal, because every villain in her novels, without exception, is a communist, or they're all collectivist socialists, whether it's Ellsworth Toohey in The Fountainhead or the bad guys in Atlas Shrugged. There's hardly a religious person in any of her novels. Never mind a villain. And of course, she spoke out, on behalf of atheism and against religion, but overwhelmingly she spoke out against collectivism, communism, National Socialism. So she certainly didn't keep up her end of the bargain, if she was a Soviet agent. But anyway, I came home and from that found out, and later emailed this guy, what you were saying. The way Ayn Rand got out was the Soviets wanted to develop a film industry, and so they let her out to go to the United States and study film on the understanding that she would come back and help establish a Soviet film industry. But she didn't keep up that end of the bargain either. Thank God for that. And who could blame her, right?
Yeah, and as you said, We the Living, her first novel, I mean, it's just from beginning to end a critique of Soviet communism and how deadly it is for human life.
And Anthem's not just communism. Any collectivist totalitarianism applies to fascism, National Socialism, communism. She devastated, the collectivists, not the religionists. So that was the idea of Ayn Rand as a Soviet agent is so bizarre that way you can just bring it up as a joke. So she meets the mill. She meets the mill. Then what happens, John?
Meets Frank O'Connor, her future husband. She starts landing all sorts of odd jobs. One is a junior screenwriter, so she's able to start putting her very tentative English skills to work, and she's just a master at mastering the language. I mean, this is incredible for her to come to the U.S. with really no English skills and to soon become a screenwriter. She becomes a head of wardrobe at RKO Studios. And, now we're into the Depression years, and it's very difficult for everyone. She's trying to wait tables. She gets fired on her first day as a waitress in one job. And, she puts up with all this because it enables her in her spare time to keep up her writing. We spoke of We the Living earlier. That was, she wrote that in 1936. I think that... tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I think that one, along with Anthem, were both originally published only in England, or did she find any publisher for We the Living?
I know Anthem was published originally in England and wasn't published in the United States till after World War II. I think We the Living was published in the United States. I'm not sure. I don't know the publishing history of Ayn Rand's books. In fact, I'll make a confession, John. Given what an admirer of Ayn Rand I am, I don't know the details of her life that well. I know, our good friend Shoshana Milgram is writing an intellectual biography of Ayn Rand. I know it's going to be brilliant. Yeah, she's put many years of work in, and she has access to the Ayn Rand archive, so I know it's going to be accurate, and I know it's going to be an outstanding book. But I've always felt that everything I needed to know about Ayn Rand's life, her mind, her soul, her character, her emotional life is in the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. That's what I know Ayn Rand from. I met her briefly on 2 occasions. I can't honestly say I know her, but I think I know her pretty well from the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. So that's really my encyclopedia for knowledge of Ayn Rand.
Here. Yeah, and I have to give Shoshana Milgram a shout out. I shot her a quick email this morning just asking her about a few things about Rand's life and various accounts of it, and she responded right away with some really interesting information. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Shoshana. Maybe we can invite her on the show at some point. some point, John.
I'd love that.
You
That
know,
would be amazing
yeah.
to get her on here. Yeah, We the Living was turned into an unauthorized Italian film, um, maybe in the 40s or 50s. I can't recall. And later, apparently, Rand helped them re-edit the film and release a version that she approved of, which is pretty cool. You can go out and watch a version of that book. Anthem, we
We the
mentioned.
Living. Well, let me say
Mhm.
something about the We the Living movie, because it was
Please.
evidently it was filmed during the war, in the 1940s.
Uh,
The fascist in Italy, and Alita Valley was perfect as Kira Aguinova, just beautiful, and it did a great job as an actress. But evidently the fascisti, filmmakers, editors, government, they saw it as an anti-Soviet, movie, because the Soviet Union by then was allied with the West. They saw it as an anti-Soviet movie, not as an anti-collectivist, anti-totalitarian movie, which shows the mentality of the very limited brain power of secret police agents and censors in a totalitarian state. Although the National Socialists in Germany saw that it wasn't just anti-communist, it was just the principles were just of the good guys, of the heroes, were just as anti-Nazi, just as anti-National Socialist, and they banned it in Germany. So the German collectivists were a little sharper than the Italian collectivists in this case. It's a great film, by the way.
Absolutely. I think a lot of
I
them
remember
are
seeing it.
philosophers.
Yeah, that's right. Land of Poets and Philosophers. You're right. Good point. I remember seeing it when it came out in New York City in 1988. It's a great film. I think the only thing I love, so everybody is a sign of the times. It's 1940s. Everybody's smoking, and constantly. And I turned to my girlfriend at that time, and I said, "They're all going to die from lung cancer long before the commies kill them." But it was 1940s.
So, picking up her biography just a little bit more here, and we'll get to the Fountainhead pretty quickly. Um, 38, she writes. She published Anthem. Believe it was on a break from writing the Fountainhead, and was unable to get a publisher in the United States. She got it published in England, but the intellectuals here in the U.S., it was still Depression era, and they were all enamored of this collectivism, this collectivist ideology that she was clearly taking issue with in the book. So that wasn't published in the U.S. until a revised version showed up in 1946.
Right.
Now, in the 40s, she's still
Right.
working on the Fountainhead, and she and Frank volunteer full time to work on the campaign for Wendell Willkie, a Republican candidate for president. She meets Henry Hazlitt, Ludwig von Mises, Isabel Patterson. Apparently, she contributed some ideas to Isabel Patterson's The God of the Machine. It's a pro-capitalist book, and all of these people that she's meeting. She's stepped into the world of influential pro-capitalist writers and thinkers.
Right.
And
Let me just interject something here, John, if you don't mind. At some
please.
point, I'm not sure when it was, Ludwig von Mises, great Austrian economist, at some point, recognizing Ayn Rand standing up against the entire intellectual establishment, called her the most courageous man in America. He called her, yeah, that's what he called her. When a friend of hers told her that, evidently she said, he called me a man. Okay, so she was delighted by that. Although she was obviously very, very, very feminine. You could see the way the way she was a man worshiper. You can see from her heroes. But she was delighted that von Mises called her the most courageous man in America. And von Mises, von Mises, I think, is accurate, as we'll see when we discuss the way she stood up to the entire intellectual and educational establishment. But I guess one story at a time, right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
please
didn't
continue.
she say that was her favorite compliment ever? And to throw one on there, I read all of Atlas Shrugged, and when I got to the end, I was like, "Who is this Ayn Rand guy? I have to find out more." That just assumed, because that name, it doesn't really give away sex. So,
Yeah.
but,
Right. Right.
So in
Right.
43, she finishes The Fountainhead, you know, amazing novel, and it's rejected by 12 publishers, a serious sign of the times, and is finally accepted by Bob's Merrill. Archibald Ogden, the editor there, staked his job on it. He said, either we're publishing this book or I'm leaving. And it's the story of Howard Roark struggling against second-handers, struggling to establish himself as
Yeah.
an architect and fighting and winning. Why don't you tell us a little bit about The Fountainhead?
Yeah, we have to, John. I think this is, in my judgment, this is the second greatest novel ever written, and for 14 years was the greatest novel ever written. And it's my all time favorite book, fiction or nonfiction. Like you said, it's the story of Howard Roark, revolutionary architect, who I think you could certainly, leaving aside the characters of Atlas Shrugged, the main. I guess we have to discuss the names. We're not, spoil. We can't worry about spoilers, right?
Yeah,
Leaving
spoiler
aside
alert.
John Galt.
If you haven't read
Yeah,
it, maybe
spoiler alert.
pause and go read it.
Spoiler alert. Leaving aside John Galt, who I think is sui generis, so in my knowledge of the history of literature, I think Howard Roark's the greatest hero in world literature. This is why I love the book so much. But Howard Roark's a revolutionary architect, and his ideas are opposed by every type of person who's used to different kinds of building. He's designing skyscrapers, and they're used to just very very traditional classical or Renaissance designs, and every type of what Ayn Rand calls secondhand. Every type of person who lets other people dominate their thinking, whether they're collectivist socialists like Ellsworth Toohey, or whether they're conformists like Peter Keating, or whether they're nonconformists like Lois Cook. Every type of secondhander, Howard Roark opposes him, and he's got to he's got to overcome all of this opposition. And then, of course, what Ayn Rand does here so brilliantly is she uh, develops one of the most fascinating female characters in literature, Dominique Franken, who she describes as herself in a bad mood, because Dominique is in love with human beings at their highest and best. That's all she cares about. You know, brilliant art, great achievements, strong moral character, a genius and a moral paragon like Howard Roark, and yet she has this very pessimistic, malevolent universe view, although in Dominique's case, it's really malevolent society view. She thinks society, human beings are generally, they're not hero worshippers. They're more iconoclasts. They either don't care about human greatness, or they're worse. They want to destroy it. And so, and she has some basis in her life to induce that. Um, if we discuss Dominique Franken, we could get into the details. But so she thinks Howard Roark's going to be crushed, and so she doesn't want to watch this long, drawn out struggle of his agonizing demise. She wants to kill him off quickly and painlessly, and above all, at the hands of someone who loves him and understands him, not anyone who hates him and or doesn't understand him. So she joins forces with Toohey, the novel's arch villain, in an anti-Roark crusade. For Toohey, it's spiritual murder. For Dominique, it's mercy killing or euthanasia. But they agree, that Roark's career must be destroyed. So Roark's got to fight against not only all the bad guys in society, he's got to fight against his own lover. It's a great story. It really is. It's a great story, and it's deep. The dialogue is extraordinary. The way ideas are expressed succinctly amongst these very 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 intelligent and brilliant. It is truly an extraordinary novel. It's gotten a little bit of the recognition it deserves, but only we only scratched the surface.
Yeah, you're going to be giving a class here starting November 3rd, and you can find out, viewers can find out more about this at objectivestandard.org, but a class on Ayn Rand's place in the history of philosophy. And I think that one of the really important philosophic concepts that you brought up, and I'd love for you to say a little bit more on is this distinction that Rand makes in the book, and as far as I know, is the first to make in history, between first-handedness and second-handedness. So just for people who haven't heard this concept and what it means for life, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Ayn Rand herself defined or described the theme of the Fountainhead as individualism versus collectivism, not in politics, but in men's soul. Whoa, that is so deep. I mean, that is just brilliant. And what she's talking about here, individualism in one's soul or collectivism in one's soul, first-handedness, second-handedness, is independence, in contrast or in conflict with dependence as a form of cognitive functioning. Some people, to put it simply, think. The old phrase "think for yourself" is a redundancy. You could drop the "for yourself" part, because if you're thinking, you're necessarily using your own brain, your own mind. You're doing it. Your own self is doing it. And then in a multitude of forms, what Ayn Rand calls second-handedness is cognitive and moral dependency on others. That kind of second-handedness is like Heinz. It's got 57 varieties. There's the conformist like Peter Keating, who just wants to everybody to like him. He's kind of pathetic. He's kind of like a puppy. He just wants to be petted, and everybody to like him. And then there's the nonconformist like Lois Cook, who finds out what other people. Peter Keating finds out what other people want, so he could kiss up to them and get their approval. Lois Cook finds out what other people want, so she could stick a knife, in them and harm them and hurt them. But still, her life is dominated by the values of others, by rebelling and fighting against others. So there's and then there's Ellsworth Toohey, the arch villain, who's a socialist, communist, collectivist, whose life is devoted to ruling the mob, the herd, the masses, to being the master of them. So he's got to keep them happy. He's got to placate them in order to keep his position as the master, so they don't reject him or rise up against him. So there's every different type of cognitive and moral dependencies of different forms of letting other people dominate your thinking and dominate your life, in contrast to going by your own judgment. That's what Ayn Rand means by first-hand, your own judgment, your judgment. So you can see she's building. Yeah, you're right. She develops this concept, and I think it's building on first having clothes, secondhand clothes. Is hand-me-downs. That in poor families, sometimes the younger kid gets the hand-me-down clothes, the second hand from the older siblings as they outgrow them, and it was the older sibling had first hand had it first. I think she's building on that expression, but yeah, it's all about cognitive independence versus cognitive dependence, and the Fountainhead. The Fountainhead is the greatest ode to independence ever written.
And it comes down to this fundamental idea, right? That the mind is an attribute of an individual. Like you said, the think for yourself is redundant because there's no hive mind. There's no collective mind. Just like there's no collective stomach that we could chew and digest one another's food. There's no thinking for other people. People must think for themselves. And to the extent that people collaborate, each one has to think for themselves and evaluate the product of other people's efforts, and either accept or walk away and choose not to deal with them. So this, of course, becomes central to her next novel, Atlas Shrugged, published in 1957, a book that still sells hundreds of thousands of copies today, right?
Yeah, and this is the greatest novel ever written. And I'll stand by those assessments till the day I die, that these are the two greatest novels ever written. I know Ayn Rand thought Victor Hugo was the greatest novelist in world literature. I can't argue with her. Hugo's magnificent. Dostoevsky's a great novelist, although I can't say I enjoy reading him. His religious views just completely dominate the landscape. But on purely literary grounds, I think The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged are the two greatest novels. Their plots, the seriousness of the themes, the way the themes are dramatized in the action, the complexity of our characters, the beautiful writing style. Anyhow, yeah, Atlas Shrugged is the story of a man who says he's going to stop the motor of the world, and then he does. And I always tell my students that, recommending them to read it. The few who can still read well enough to read Atlas Shrugged. And he goes, stop the motor of the world. Well, what does that mean? And I said, well, it's a mystery story. You got to read the book. You gotta find out. It's an extraordinary novel. I mean, think about it, John. There's nothing like it in world literature. It's not like I've read every novel, ever written, but I've read a lot of the great novels in world literature. And by the way, I was really honored when Cliff's Notes asked me, to write the Cliff Notes on Ayn Rand's, novels, because I always like Cliff Notes. They're very inductive. Cliff Notes. If you look at them, they more than literary professors who often deal with, they're very rationalistic. They deal with abstractions about the story. Cliff Notes always starts out with the plot, starts out with the story, starts out with the characters and what the characters do, and then extracts the themes from that. So I always like Cliff Notes. They're very inductive in that way. But anyhow, by the way, I guess I can interrupt myself with a story. I'm sitting on a plane in 2000. I'm writing the Cliff Notes, for Atlas Shrugged. I was in on a plane. We're taking off from LGA. I'm going to Houston. I'm going to give some talks in Houston. And some guy sitting across the aisle, he's reading the Fountainhead. And I just finished the Cliff Notes of Fountainhead. I'm working on the ones that Atlas Shrugged. And I said, the Fountainhead. I said, I see you reading the Fountainhead. The guy looks at me. He says, you know something about this book? And I said, well, yeah, I dabble in it. It was good. Yeah, it was great to see the guy reading the book on my all-time favorite book on the plane. But think about it, the literary accomplishment in Atlas Shrugged, this literary tour de force, John, where John Galt's behind the scenes through fully the first 2/3 of the novel, and yet he's dominating the action of the novel. I don't know any. And it's on this grand scale, and then the way Ayn Rand weaves the plot together. Dagny, the beautiful and brilliant engineer who runs Taggart Transcontinental, suspects that there's somebody, some destroyer, she calls him, who's pulling all the brains of the world out on strike, or pulling them away from the world. She calls him the evilest creature that ever lived, and she vows to shoot him on sight. But at the same time, she finds the remnants of this extraordinary motor that would transform industry and human life, and she's trying to find the inventor of the motor. At the same time, she's looking for the love of her life, the Atlas beyond the horizon holds up the rails that she's never met, and she finds it all in one and the same guy that she's deeply in love with, the guy she swears to shoot on sight. It's extraordinary plot integration, the way Ayn Rand integrates the love story with her world-shattering story about the collapse of human civilization, including industrial civilization, into this brilliant story that fully dramatizes her profound theme, the most profound theme ever dramatized in a work of literature, and that is man's mind. The role of the mind in human existence. That man's mind is the means by which we make all progress, whether it's learn how to grow food or cure diseases or build cities or write novels or develop philosophy and logic or develop scientific theories. And also that the mind, the political concomitant, that the mind requires individual rights and political economic liberty. And it's all bound up, completely integrated and dramatized in this extraordinary story of a man who said he would stop the motor of the world. It's so tragic that the American schools very often don't use phonics to teach reading. The kids struggle just to read because there's this amazing story, greatest novel ever written, and so many people, even college graduates, they struggle to read Atlas Shrugged. It's really heartbreaking. It's such a great story.
Yeah, you're right. The progressive education system that's been in place for about 100 years is just crippling minds and keeping a lot of people from enjoying great literature like this. Thankfully,
Yeah,
I was introduced to it at 17 and go ahead.
And proving in a negative way Ayn Rand's point that the mind is man's tool of survival, and when it's stunted, we don't do well. But yeah, this is an amazing story. I recommend it to everybody. And we should talk about the reception it received, and what Ayn Rand went through, and what motivated Ludwig von Mises to call her the most courageous man in the world. It was here's the greatest novel ever written. How was it received, John?
Not with applause, at least not from critics. One indicative review was the review that appeared in National Review by Wilker's. I can't remember.
Yeah, Whittaker Chambers.
Whittaker Chambers, ex-communist. Yeah,
right. Communist turned Christian.
Yeah, and he said that from every page on the novel, he said something to the effect of, "One can hear to the gas chamber go," and he basically lied about the nature of the novel to keep people from reading it. Really bizarre and crazy that this review even got published, but there are others like it. The novel, just like the Fountainhead, succeeded on
Big Sister
word
is
of
watching.
mouth.
John, Big Sister is watching was the title of Whittaker Chambers' piece. And William Buckley, a National Review, not only published it, but National Review's proud of it. This piece of garbage. I mean, years later, they put it up on their website. They might still have it on their website. Like it's something like it was something to be proud of. It was a semi-illiterate smear job that you would expect better from there. At least I would, from National Review, which claims to be an intellectual publication and supporting capitalism and so on. It was a disgrace. I mean, it is a disgrace. And the leftist publications did hire communists or former communists to review the book and so on.
Right. Yeah, I think we should talk too about Rand called herself a romantic realist. And we mentioned before Hugo, Dostoevsky. She looked up to these people as writers and saw that their plots were ingenious, absolutely incredible, and they captured the mind. They reeled you in. They had these incredible characters, and they understood that man has free will, that he gets to decide how to act in this world, that he can go after ambitious goals and achieve them. Hugo at least portrays that. Dostoevsky generally does not. She recognizes their incredible talent, but she detests their philosophies, their politics. Les Mis, amazing book. The political message from the book is at least mildly pro-socialist, not outright. But she understood and she valued that these people were portraying man as a being with free will who gets to decide his fate. These things aren't happening by accident, as would be the case with modern art, non-objective art. But what puts Rand in a whole different category is that she's not just creating an entirely new story and a new means of telling a story, but she created an entirely new philosophy upon which to base the story. And I think this is true of the Fountainhead and more so of Atlas Shrugged. But this puts her really, like you said earlier, sweet, generous. It puts her in a realm of her own, because there are no other philosophers in history or no other novelists in history that were also philosophers that created entirely new systems of philosophy upon which to base, a whole universe of characters and to give us this incredible story. So
it's complete. Yeah, you're right. So it's completely unique. There's an adage in the field of writing that philosophers make lousy novelists. which is generally true. Or intellectuals make lousy novelists, which is generally true because they're writing themes. They have these ideas in their mind, and then they're looking for some kind of story to express it. And very often it's just a bunch of guys talking about their ideas. Ayn Rand's writing plots. She's writing plots. She's developing characters, and the serious themes are not just talked about; they're carried by the action. And here's what a few points I want to make on this. A lot of people know Ayn Rand as a philosopher, which is it's a good thing. There's a Ayn Rand Society and the American Philosophical Association, which is good. They're studying objectivism. It's a complete philosophic system, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, theory of human nature. You mentioned my upcoming course for OSI on Ayn Rand's place in the history of philosophy. We're going to discuss that, in the context of the history of philosophy, of Plato and Aristotle, and Descartes, and Kant, and Hegel and Locke. It's going to be a fun course. But the thing we have to remember is Ayn Rand was first, foremost, and always a novelist. That's what she lived for. That's what she burned with passion for. She's an artiste. She is the greatest novelist in world literature. And she delved into the field of philosophy because the goal of her fiction was to create the ideal man. And in order to create the ideal man, she had to study philosophy. She had to know philosophy. She had to create her own philosophy. I mean, it's just unbelievable. She became, I would say, I'm going to argue in the course, John, that second only to Aristotle, she's the greatest philosopher of history, and she became such as a secondary means to achieve her real goal, which was to create the ideal man in her novels, which she succeeded at abundantly. He says there's nothing. It's unbelievable. You can't make this stuff up. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, what do they say? Truth is stranger than fiction, right? I mean, it's extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's unbelievable that she developed this world-changing philosophy and resolved some of the most important and pressing questions in the history of philosophy. She helped bridge the is-ought gap and show that there's this connection between fact and values. And she showed that the senses are objective, that concepts are objective, that knowledge is objective. So she created these incredible ideas as a solution to the problem of creating amazing fiction characters. It's just her genius is on a scale that comes along maybe once every couple centuries.
Yeah, well, once every millennium. I don't know, but it's to be an extraordinary achiever in one field is very rare and very, very, very laudable. But to be an extraordinary achiever in two fields, to revolutionize two fields, literature and philosophy, which she did, because nobody ever dramatized the profound philosophic themes in action in a riveting story the way Ayn Rand did. I mean, the whole field of literature now has been transformed. You say, wow, look what the novel form look what you could do with the novel form. Wow. Nobody ever saw this before Ayn Rand, before the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, and create a revolutionary philosophy at the same time that will, and for the purpose of her artistic achievements, a philosophy that in time will revolutionize the world. It's just jaw-dropping. I mean, it's like all I can do is salute Ayn Rand and thank myself. Thankfully, John, as all these bad things going on in the world, with Trump and Biden, and the left is going to burn down the cities if Trump wins the election. All the bad things going on in the world. I just thank God. Can use that as an expression, that I was born in a post-Ayn Rand world. I just thank God that I was born into a world where Ayn Rand's novels were already written and objectivism was already achieved, because it's made an enormously beneficial impact in my life. And I think there's a lot of people who've read Ayn Rand who would second that motion.
And she famously titled the sections of Atlas Shrugged after propositions identified by Aristotle. Do you want to talk a little bit? We've mentioned the course you've got coming up on Ayn Rand's place in the history of philosophy. Do you want to talk a little bit about her acknowledged debt to Aristotle and the ways in which she built on his achievement?
Yeah, Ayn Rand was convinced that Aristotle was the greatest philosopher in history. I think she's right. One of many things. What Aristotle did in his life was unbelievable, especially in the 4th century BC. We discussed him. He pioneers the field of biology as well as being the greatest philosopher in history. If he had done nothing other than pioneer the field of logic, where he formulated the rules of proper reasoning. He identified the main errors of reasoning known as the logical fallacies, such that to this day, if you take a beginning logic course at the university level, you're going to be studying Aristotle. And you're right, Ayn Rand named the 3 parts of Atlas Shrugged after his famous laws in logic: the law of identity, law of non-contradiction, and law of excluded middle. And Ayn Rand builds on Aristotle, as we'll see in the course. The great achievements of Aristotle. Of course, he's entirely naturalistic, unlike his own mentor Plato, who held there was a transcendent world, beyond this one that was necessary to gain knowledge. Aristotle said, no, we can gain knowledge from the natural world. Knowledge is gained by all knowledge begins with observation, and universals have to be drawn from observation. That knowledge is gained by application of logical, non-contradictory thinking to observable fact. That in alone, Aristotle, as we discussed on the Aristotle show, Aristotle's greatest achievement is that he, more than anybody, is the thinker, who is the philosopher who taught mankind how to think. And that's the extraordinary achievement. He had a lot of other achievements as well. He's a great moral philosopher. He's a great metaphysician. Got a lot of interesting things to say about aesthetics and politics. But yeah, teaching mankind how to think is I think what Ayn Rand it properly identifies him as the greatest philosopher of history. She builds on his achievements. We stand on the shoulders of giants. I think it was Newton who said that, and Aristotle is the preeminent giant upon whose shoulders we stand. And Ayn Rand recognized that brilliantly, and Objectivism builds on Aristotle's achievements and perfects some of his errors. But you're right.
I think she said something to the effect of, go ahead.
Yeah, Objectivism, the very name. You said it before. What's the essence? The essence of it is that concepts or principles or thoughts are grounded in the facts of reality. Values, morality, moral principles are grounded in the facts, in the observable facts of reality. The first one answering a whole host of people historically, like Plato and Descartes, and the second one answering Hume. That values can't be derived from facts. It's both concepts and values are objective, that is grounded in an observable fact. Ayn Rand gives beautiful proofs in both cases and revolutionizes the field of philosophy. And I think the way she integrates values with facts, the way she ties them together, I think makes her the greatest moral philosopher of history.
I'd have to agree with you. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about this in your course. I'm definitely going to take it.
It's going to be fun.
We're coming up on an hour, I think. Do we want to talk about the closing decades of Rand's life?
Well, I would just say, I think what's important, again, is to reiterate von Mises' point about how courageous she was. She was opposed by the entire leftist establishment. She was opposed by the religionists, and they weren't very nice about it either, John, if I just put it mildly. I mean, they reviled her. It was just, Big Sister is watching, is characteristic of the, to a gas chamber go, like you quoted from Whittaker Chambers' essay. They were brutal about it. She overturned every look. There's, prior to Ayn Rand in the 20th century, there were basically two dominant philosophies in the world: religion And in the West, of course, that's Christianity and the Catholic Church, a big part of that. And then, German philosophy, Kant, Hegel, Marx, with its political offshoot of collectivism and socialism. We could just think of it as modernism and religion, or modernism and Christianity in the West. Those are the two dominant philosophies. And Ayn Rand challenged both of them. And she challenged both of them in brilliantly popular books as read by millions. They hated her. And she was fearless. I mean, she just stood up. She just stood up against them. She refused to back off. She refused to back down. And she told the truth. And when necessary, she pointed out how evil they were, constantly against the leftists. And you could read her essay in Capitalism: The Unknown Ideal about the papal encyclical. And she did go after the religionists sometimes. Maybe she was a Soviet agent at that, John. But but obviously the main danger in her lifetime was the main danger in her lifetime was the leftists, and she went after them brutally and brilliantly, and they didn't like her. So most courageous man in America? Yeah, I think von Mises was right. I do. All of this stuff adds up to one of the most extraordinary, maybe the most extraordinary heroine in all of history, and just one of the most extraordinary heroes of either gender. Ayn Rand, Alyssa Rosenbaum.
She said that objectivism, in essence, is the concept of man as a heroic being with his own happiness as the moral purpose of his life, with productive achievement as his noblest activity and reason as his only absolute. And as we've gone into, her novels portrayed these values and portrayed men overcoming incredible odds to achieve ambitious goals. And they've impacted millions of lives, mine and yours included, for sure. And they continue to sell hundreds of thousands of copies every year. So her impact on the world is tremendous.
As well they might, and hopefully they sell more. Let me just 1 second hold up the hero book here, Heroes, Legends, Champions, Why Heroism Matters, because I could not have written this book if it were not for Ayn Rand. First of all, she identified that man's life is the standard of moral value. That's the way she tied values to facts. And so for anybody who's a hero worshiper and wants to understand heroes, there's the big light bulb goes off. Well, yeah, that heroes act in promotion of human life. Heroes are the ones who advance human life. That's the essence. Heroes are good guys, and that's the essence of being a good guy. And then her inductive epistemology, that concepts and principles are induced from observational fact by a process of integration and differentiation. The opening chapters of the Hero book rely completely on Ayn Rand's epistemology. How do we form the concept of hero in the first place? Why do we need the concept of hero? Anybody could read my book and see it's a process of integration and differentiation, just like Ayn Rand described in her introduction to objectivist epistemology. It's a very inductive process. So the book on heroes couldn't have been written without Ayn Rand's philosophy in at least two ways, and also her spirit of hero worship. It permeates. Ayn Rand and I agree on that. We're both hero worshipers. And it permeates the book. So I got to thank Ayn Rand. I think salute one of the greatest heroes of history. I think we could go on for hours, but I think that's a wrap, John. Unless you have any last things you want to say about this extraordinary heroine.
Just that if you're interested in learning more and you want to know more about her place in the history of philosophy, definitely check out Andy's course coming up through the Objective Standard Institute. You can check it out at objectivestandard.org. Again, the course is called Ayn Rand's Place in the History of Philosophy. And that begins on November 3rd.
Well, thank you, John. I think that course is going to be both very informative and a great deal of fun. So I want to wish you and everybody to have a more heroic day, have a more heroic life, and we'll see you next week, everybody.
See you next week.